founders of a new company called Campaign Livecast. I'm clearly the fish out of water here because I really don't know anything about advertising, but I do know something about politics, and I'll try and chime in.
Christine Cook, CNN. I don't know about what I do. I'm sure as the conversation gets going, not British, and
taking applications. And I'm Trevor Burrows. So I guess I'm the second token for this panel, but also that I think it's relevant to what we're talking about today. I'm a fairly newly minted American too.
This is very word.
Is one of the most anticipated events probably this year. And it's expected to net close to $10 billion in advertising revenue. So today our panelists will discuss the ecosystem that marketers navigate around that and how they navigate such a complex landscape. So that being said, out of just pure curiosity with a show of hands, how many of you watched Curb Your Enthusiasm? Okay, so about maybe half the room here.
we are in LA. I think that's like a requirement to live here.
So hopefully this anecdote doesn't go over everyone's head, but there was an episode early in the season this year where Larry David made plans to have lunch and with somebody, and he had been trying to get out of this lunch for quite a while. And he came up with this idea of wearing a MAGA hat, and he would walk into the restaurant, and as soon as he sat down, the person he was supposed to have lunch with kind of bailed out. And every time he wanted to clear space, everyone would just give him his space. Nobody wanted to be associated to him. So that being said, political content can often create some sort of bias where it's a difficult place to navigate. And so advertisers are working this landscape. So my question to the real panel here is, how are marketers responding to that? And is there some way to effectively communicate your message?
Before we answer, is everyone hearing a delay on the audio?
Yes.
Yes. Is there any way that we can fix that? Is that a changeable situation? It's fine. Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. Okay. Well, actually, I wasn't planning to answer the question.
But you've got the microphone. Yeah,
so I kind of set myself up for that. Look, I mean, I think from Twitter's point of view, and I think more importantly for journalism as a whole, that there is, it's really important to distinguish between political content and coverage of political events by independent, high-quality news and information organizations. And when it comes to coverage of political events and happenings and breaking news, there is tremendous audience engagement and scale of audience around those things, particularly in the moment that we're in today. And so for me, that opportunity is one, comes to you through the lens of independent journalism. And two, is incredibly compelling because of the engaged eyeballs that are really desperate for quality information and context on the news as it happens.
I think that's well said. I think there's a really big difference. I think it's important from seeing Larry David advocate for President Trump and what a professional news organization does. And I think sometimes that advertisers, in their desire to be brand safe, lose sight of that. I do think what's interesting is I think they're coming back to understanding that. I think we've moved on from what was really a crisis in confidence brought on 5-6 years ago by ISIS and by advertisers quite rightly being very scared of being associated with content that was proposing fundamentalist points of view and that was helping to fund through YouTube, for example, those groups themselves. I think, as often happens, the pendulum swung too far, and the notions of brand safety became all-encompassing. I think one of the interesting things about digital media is what you can measure. Right? You sometimes do end up measuring, irrespective of whether it's a good idea to know what that measurement is. And I think we've seen brand safety go from a very laudable aim to levels of absurdity. There's no question that when you're watching Lester Holt or whether you're watching any of your great anchors, they're not advocating for a particular politician. They're reporting the news, they're questioning people, they're delving into what's happening in policy and elsewhere. that's very different to shilling for a particular candidate. So our point of view very strongly is brands should be very careful about being associated with particular candidates. I don't think that's good for any brand, but they should actually really engage in the news process, both perhaps most importantly from their own perspectives, because it's such an important medium, it delivers such large audiences, it delivers intelligent, engaged audiences, but also, and this is perhaps a self-interested point of view, it helps support the overall news ecosystem, which is critical to our democracy.
Yeah.
But I mean, don't certain channels today have a political bias and that's sort of accepted? I mean, MSNBC is very different than Fox News.
Totally. There's a 1% crossover between their viewership. Okay. But the viewers who watch Fox News like the Fox point of view.
Right.
The viewers who watch MSNBC like the MSNBC point of view. And they regard the advertisers who are on each channel as actually just engaging in helping them watch that content. They don't believe what's interesting, that I don't think anybody watching MSNBC seeing a Toyota ad believes that Toyota are only advertising on MSNBC and would never advertise on Fox. Right. So yes, parts of channels do have opinions. There's a distinction between our news gathering and our opinion content, but the audience is smart, and they get that distinction.
I also think there's a difference in digital versus broadcast. And as we have so many channels, we have social platforms, we have websites, mobile apps, alerts, that how you get your news and how each of those channels, what they represent to you is different. And so I think there is some confusion that is negatively leveraged about the role of broadcast channels, because when something happens, you're going to find out digitally. Then you typically are going to a broadcast source to understand more texture. So the role of how broadcast has evolved now typically has a lead journalist or newscaster who brings in multiple points of view. And most of them are in pursuit of the facts. And then they bring in people from different sides, typically to talk about different points of view on that, or their own aspect of that story. And I think that has been leveraged. The majority of traditional broadcast or news organizations are towards the facts. I do not think, some of them might have a slight slant, but the majority of them do. And then online, I think people are, consuming and reading a longer form. It is, this topic of brand safety comes up a lot, and I think it's such a big bucket. There's brand safety, brand suitability, and brand fit. And the American Association of Advertising Agencies has come out with a brand suitability grid that states that news organizations and advertising on news organizations are brand safe, because there's a rigor that goes into fact checking and all of those things that makes it a great place for your brands. Moreover, people, like to the point made, that choose one place over another are there to learn. And having a learning mindset and an open mindset is the actual perfect recipe for advertising. You want to be open to learning about that brand's point of view, or why I should consider that brand.
Christine, you make a really good point. A lot of advertisers might choose multiple platforms. And so if you think about linear, an advertiser might insert their message between content, whereas on digital, they'll insert it over within, along with other advertisers and other pieces of content. What ways have you seen, or would you suggest marketers take in terms of a strategy to have an effective omni-channel strategy or multi-platform strategy when it comes to leveraging political content and positioning the brand around that?
I mean, I would just start by saying...
Twitter.
Christine would start by saying Twitter. I would start by saying, look where the audience is. And the audience is not on a single platform. It's not on a single broadcast network. It's not on a single digital site. It's everywhere. And the way that audiences consume news is changing by virtue of technology, but it's also changing by virtue of the incredibly lightning fast news cycle. You can't wait to 6:30 until the evening news comes on to consume what's happening. You are connected all day, and you're connected in different ways. So to me, the first and most important insight is how are consumers consuming news in today's extraordinary news environment? And then with that consideration, well, what is the best way to access those audiences at scale? And I think that one of the things that we do is that we work and partner with organizations like CNN and NBC News, and advertisers, through the wonderful sales teams of Trevor and the wonderful sales teams of Christine, can actually buy CNN on CNN or NBC News on NBC and extend their audiences to Twitter. And I would say that that is a great way of dealing with different consumption habits and dealing with audiences in different places, consuming news in different ways.
Excellent. So that actually brings me to my next question or topic in relationship to that. A lot of advertisers or marketers will position their brand, but are they buying on the news, the audiences of the news as a collective, or are they buying specifically against certain types of political content? And what type of advertisers are leaning in towards what type of content?
We've seen both. I mean, it's interesting. Last week we had the State of the Union. We saw more interest in advertisers for this year's State of the Union than we've seen for some time, interestingly enough. There was a time when you used to have a massive advertiser interest. That waned for a wee while, but it's definitely coming back. We certainly see some specific types of brands that love the large audience that news gives. I think one of the really telling signs is that D2C brands, who are incredibly disciplined about understanding what advertising works and where, I mean, their entire structures depend on it, have been very big buyers of news these last 2 years. They like the audiences, they like the engagement. And one told me recently, one based around the corner here, told me that they've received 5x the return on advertising in news to advertising in traditional primetime programming. Now, that's partly a function of price, but it's also a function of how engaged the audience is. So you're seeing brands like that. You're seeing brands like movie studios who've always liked the big audiences. But we're starting to see some banks who had been a little chary of political-oriented coverage start to come back and understand. To your point of a few minutes ago, they really like the fact that they have an audience with a questioning mindset who are open to different points of view. Now, it's true to say, to your point, that if you're watching MSNBC or you're watching Fox, you probably have a predisposition to a certain view of the world. But these are still curious people. They're still looking to learn more. And I think that's incredibly compelling for an advertiser.
Right. So some of these advertisers might invest in an upfront experience. So they don't really know what type of content is going to be out there yet. They just have a sense of the editorial calendar. But when you think about digital placements, if it's run a site or programmatically, that brand message could be aligned to almost any sort of headline. How do you believe brands are adapting to that type of change? And how do they protect themselves? I mean, do you see their content changing in any capacity with expectation that they may not know where they show up? Or do you see them creating more custom content during these type of events?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, the upfronts, which you're referencing, were grounded in making sure that your marketing messages were against the most popular shows. So it actually was a context to start with. And then as audiences have gotten more sophisticated with addressable on TV or online, it definitely did shift that way. But still, even within our world, when marketers come into the upfront, they buy shows and they buy tentpoles. Right. And increasingly, as some of those tentpoles in a political cycle tend to be a debate where they know there's going to be a large audience with high attention, they are seizing those moments in interesting ways. The other extension of this would be experiential, where outside of digital and linear, there are moments in real life, the conventions or efforts that we make to get people to come out and vote and participate as citizens in our democracy. And I think that there are interesting moments for brands. And so in the upfronts, we're seeing more than just TV being purchased. Increasingly, year over year, we're seeing a lot of digital go with that. And then that means that they're aligning with tentpole moments. And to your point, they lock in those high quality, high demand programming moments that we have, And then what they do to execute on that, they make that decision once it gets closer to it. But the first and foremost thing is, hey, I know that's a big moment. I need to get a piece of that. Am I going to have a quarter of it or whatever? And then when that moment comes, do I use a classic commercial that was created by my creative agency, or some combination of that with branded content that maybe is, reflective of corporate social responsibility, or something that's going to line up with policy discussions?
So how has technology changed the political content that's shared? We, as a society, are very tech-centric, so we consume content in a lot of different ways, whether it be social platforms, mobile apps, live streams. In your experiences from your organization, how do you believe that content has been influenced by that?
I got one.
Yes.
Let's
That's
go
just
to the
for you,
man
Robert.
in the middle.
Yeah,
I'm just
middle.
waiting for this one. Again, what we've created is a interactive live streaming platform for political content. Politicians, the organizations that support them, other kinds of organizations, that allows the candidate to talk directly with the consumer, and the consumer to talk directly to the candidate. And we think that's the ultimate form of engagement, and we think that's the ultimate form of political content. So whereas simply by nature of the beast, media companies talk at people, we allow political content to be an engagement, people talking with people. And we think that will support a new kind of advertising, new kinds of advertisers who want to be talking to people that are very politically engaged, that are very interested in what's going on at that moment in time. And so we're looking forward to seeing whether or not we can attract advertisers to this sort of new kind of where TV crosses with technology and provides an engaging experience.
And here's the thing, I think that kind of opportunity is so huge. There's this bad rap about politics. And when you're in a news organization, sometimes you have the responsibility to report some things that are hard. Things happen, but communities depend on us to tell them and let them know what's going on. If a hurricane or if there's an earthquake in Puerto Rico, sometimes we have to report on stuff that isn't, where an advertiser should be. And we all take measures to protect brands when we have to report that news. But our audiences expect and depend on us as the definitive source for those, right? Politics is different than that. Politics is like the boardroom of our democracy. It is safe. You may not like that someone's winning popular vote over another, but it is the policy that we participate in. And so it's actually safer than some of the other stuff that if an airplane crash goes down, for years and years, you remove all airlines off of that. Like, we've been doing stuff like that. It's an opportunity to change the narrative that politics can be a good place. And to get to, current technologies, there are more people of the millennial generation or the younger generation participating by actively taking roles in government, seated, voted in positions. And for people who couldn't, for whatever reason, financially or disciplinary, didn't do that, they're paying attention to politics. They want to believe in their community. That's why you see other movements of people moving to Raleigh, North Carolina, or smaller communities, because they want to have an impact on their community. Having the ability to have a conversation with the people that are representing you is exactly what the next generation of voters want. And so brands not being there, they're missing out on a hugely important area of engaged, open-minded attention. I mean, what you're creating virtually is what used to exist when campaigns went to diners. But they just can't get to all the diners. Now we have technology that can basically bring the diner into someone's living room, and, to the earlier point, the people that go to one channel versus another, when they show up, they're there. So why not put your message? Otherwise, everything's going to go behind a paywall.
All right.
And that advertising inventory will go away, which is not good for marketers. And, I think it's really exciting.
Great. I think the one thing that's hard about it is that it's an unfortunate thing, and I think you used the number $7 billion going to be spent on political advertising this year. I've seen numbers up to $10 billion. There are people saying it's even more. part of the challenge is that a lot of political advertising is about fundraising. And I don't know how brands are going to respond to the idea that people are there and are being asked for their money, and they're also trying to advertise on top of that. That's not the typical way advertising works in the media today. So it's going to be a challenge to find out whether people will want to sponsor an event where somebody else is asking for money.
I mean,
I think, well, I'm going to be very boring and agree with everything you've just said. But I think there's an interesting shot of that. I think brands will lean into where they find an engaged audience. I think the content is important, but what's much, much more important is the quality of the audience.
yeah. And to your point, Christine, about the virtual town square, what technology has really done is given the opportunity for everyone to have a microphone and everyone to become a reporter. And that is a responsibility that means it's even more important for quality news and information to exist on platforms like Twitter, platforms like Facebook, because there's so many more reports of things happening coming from users around the world that need to be verified, validated, contextualized, etc. And so in many ways, I think that volume of information and the openness of what technology has made the political conversation today has been perhaps the single biggest change to, political news and to politics.
Well, I mean, just to build on that, at CNN Digital, as one point in time, in January, we had the biggest month that we've ever had in the history of CNN. And there's a variety of things that are happening. But what we see is, yes, we have open platforms where, reporters, individual reporters show up. And then people are turning around and coming to us, and I'm sure you've experienced it too, which underscores the brand integrity and the brand safety that I think as that trend, everybody wants to be able to come in with a whole bunch of information, and then when they want to verify it or get to the bottom of it or make sure it's real, that's when they're going to journalistic-centric organizations, and or why some of the curation that you guys do on Twitter of brands like ours, gets the attention that it does. And that's actually really exciting because it shows some logic that's happening instead of just like dumb allegiance to somebody said something, which kind of got us screwed in the last election. So now I'm a little bit more optimistic about this election because I feel like people are going to go to source check and fact check and not get duped by some of the things that kind of got us duped before.
I think the candidates often feel that their voice is filtered or editorialized when it's not direct from them.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we bring, and again, I'm hoping that this is successful, but the unfiltered news, I think, you see this all the time. When you talk to politicians, they go, that's not exactly what I said. That's not exactly what I meant, but it has to be encapsulated, it has to be communicated in a short period of time, whereas if you gave them an opportunity to talk more and answer a backup question or a follow-up question, it's more engaging and perhaps more honest from the politician's standpoint.
Well, I mean, that's why I think our town halls have been so popular to the extent that they have. And we've done, not just debates, but the ability to get on a specific topic, which narrows the conversation. And I think by the number of people that tune in and engage in conversations around that, there's clearly an appetite.
Yeah. You guys have all validated the importance of audience. And a lot of these audiences are on a lot of tech-centric platforms. And so that ultimately cultivates and paves the way for data signals to be identified. How do you believe, or how do you think brand marketers should approach using data signals to identify when, where, and who they should be aligned with when it comes to political advertising?
In a political context.
Around political content.
So I have a view which you guys may disagree with. I actually think brands should do relatively little changing of their message depending on the audience they're reaching. I think what every brand wants to get across is their integrity. And I think it's very hard to have a reputation for integrity if you're making a different message point to Democrats versus to Republicans or to the undecided vote. So my advice would be keep your messaging the same. Talk about what your brand does, what it stands for, and ignore the political leanings of the audience. Take advantage of the size, take advantage of their engagement, but don't try and pander to one party over the other.
Although there is an opportunity to think about advertising more like in the PBS model too. There's, to have Patagonia sponsor these virtual town halls about environmental issues, for example, is a way for them to associate their brand with a specific topic, and they want, that may be what we see as a different type of advertising, is the sponsorship model as opposed to...
I would agree, but I would say if Patagonia, which is a wonderful brand, wants to make an advertisement about their very strong reputation and what they've done to help the environment, run that on Fox as well as MSNBC.
Yeah.
Take that message to everybody. Don't be partisan in the audience that you go after.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, also run it on Twitter, because that
Of course.
that has everyone. And
Because Twitter.
well, I mean, I think the reality is if you're looking for different viewpoints, and if you're looking for diverse audiences that come to experience what's happening, but with their own different sets of interests, and you want to reach them all, it's really important to think about where these folks live and how they consume media. We released our financial results yesterday morning, and we have 150 million daily.
So you got 150 new millionaires working at Twitter. That's what you were going to say.
Unfortunately not. 150 million daily users that are consuming the site, and they come from all different stripes with all different opinions and views. And I think that it's really important to think about how to create campaigns that can reach them across all of their viewpoints.
Here's the technology that you did. This is the reverse of what you asked. I don't think marketers typically are using tech to target, liberals versus conservatives. I do see marketers in an attempt to shield themselves from what they might think are unsavory, using technology and like keyword block lists and context. And oftentimes the president's name is on that list. Oh. So let's just skip the bit about who the president is or how you may or may not feel about him. It's the president of the United States. So there's fundamentally a problem if advertisers don't want to put advertising messages in a news environment because the president of the United States is in it. And so there's a lot of dialogue in the community right now about really looking at what those block lists work and why they exist, came out of ISIS, came out of some long tail user generated video situation, which is not the environment that we would ever provide. So I think that the technology question is an interesting one, and it's evolving. And it was a blunt object that was used that is kind of unwinding. And I think that the 4A's work about brand suitability gets us there.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate what you said about CSR as well, corporate social responsibility. And using technology to avoid certain topics is one tactic, but when you think about a lot of the tentpole events that happen across the year, like the Super Bowl, the Olympics, a lot of brands will craft their message specifically for that. And you brought up a really good point a moment ago where, a lot of brands might also create social responsibility messaging, and that aligns very well with election events. You don't really see many brands crafting an original message. So ultimately, I think there's a lot of data signals that you can use around that, but identifying data to target it on a passion could fall well with a certain brand.
I actually have a question, which is, in our world where people are actually engaging with a candidate, the question has come up, should we let them engage with each other? And that can create a horrible situation. I mean, anybody who's looked at Twitch or some of the other things, it can be completely out of hand. I just wonder if that's something that brands, from your perspective, would be nervous about, is an uncontrolled environment where all kinds of things can be going on beyond our control.
Well, we know nothing about that.
I was going to say, that one's for Nick.
That really is for Nick. I mean, I think one of the beautiful things about journalism is the rigor and discipline that goes into that, so that when a brand is advertising on a reputable channel, website, there's there's an assured level of quality, of intellectual rigor, and of a discipline there, which is incredibly important. And I think it's one of the things I applaud about what Twitter has done in not taking political advertising, recognizing that their content is coming from millions of people. I think they've made the very responsible decision to decline political advertising there. It may be for a different reason, but I think the benefit's big.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, health and the health of the public conversation is Jack and the company's number one priority. It's to make that civic dialogue as healthy and as positive and as with as many perspectives as possible is absolutely central to his mission and to what we're doing. We took the decision to ban political advertising, predominantly because, Twitter offers such granular targeting capabilities with such a large audience of daily users and so many tools to optimize those people that you're targeting your messages to, that we just thought that there was a lot of unknown risk around political candidates, leveraging those tools, with potentially great effect. And so we thought that the implications of that were troubling. And so we decided that the right thing to do was to make a statement that reach needed to be earned on our platform and not bought from political candidates. And I think that there are many things that need to happen in order to make sure that the election has integrity, that it's safe. There are issues that we're dealing with day to day, like deepfakes, what are known as deepfakes, what we call synthetic and manipulated media. And we've taken a strong position on that, in which anyone that publishes a video that has been manipulated to cause civic harm, we can now take that down, and we have a policy to enforce that, to take it down. And so, to your point, yes, you're right. These environments, by virtue of their openness, they bring people in there that are not necessarily good actors or trying to promote the quality of the conversation. And it is our absolute priority to address that, to fix that, and to create a platform which is incredibly attractive to advertisers and which there's positive and brand safe conversations happening throughout.
Thank you for that. So one final question for everybody on the panel. I know that we're a little bit over right now, but what does the future hold from your perspective? What trends do you see? What innovations can be had? What's the white space in terms of building a better experience of both marketers and consumers?
I mean, for me, I think that, to Christine's point, where, the President of the United States is on blacklists around advertising and how I think the industry is coming together to educate and to discuss those kinds of policies, I think that the pendulum is going to swing the other way. And because you have this reticence on the part of some advertisers to engage and to invest in political coverage, but at the same time, it's where so much engagement is happening that the pendulum needs to swing and is swinging, and I think is going to swing even further, and I think that that's going to happen throughout 2020. And so I think that that's going to have a great impact on news organizations, and it's my belief that news organizations will not just survive because they are under some pressure, but will thrive, and that they will increasingly become, really great homes for advertising and for brand investment.
We hope that our approach is, the future, or at least a part of the future. It's a more engaging kind of way to get your news, a more engaging way to consume political advertising, which to a great extent it is. And we'll be curious to see whether or not you can attract a large audience this way. We think there are some opportunities. We actually think that people who support a particular candidate, it could be celebrities, it could be organizations, it could be trade unions, it could be anybody who can bring a large audience to say, we're supporting and we're sponsoring this way for people to engage directly. We think this is a new area, and we're very interested to see how it plays out in terms of where the revenue comes from and whether it's a place that brands are comfortable in.
some of the things that we've talked about already. I think the privilege to offer a marketer services to produce mini documentaries or tell their brand purpose story and use the right spots across our portfolio, whether it's taking over 5 commercial spots and running a native pod that tells a 2 to 3 minute video, or breaking that down into photo gallery or an image gallery on a website, and or parsing into a series of tweets or sponsored Twitter moments. The white space that we've seen growth, good return, and good renewals from clients is exploiting that, because our tone, like the more that you can keep tone consistency from the thinking about the consumer, I see more growth in that. And a big part of that I mentioned too is experiential, and there's some good progress that we've seen there. We think about branded content and brand storytelling as a film, and sometimes you'll do a screening, but increasingly we're seeing that the right solution sometimes is creating an experience, filming the experience, and then using that as a catalyst to get the message out. So I'm excited about the creativity in that space.
So I think advertising gets much better. I think it gets more targeted. I think it gets less interruptive. I think it gets less repetitive. I think it becomes better for the marketer. I think it becomes easy for us as we get scale to deliver the right audiences to the right brand at the right time. And I think from the consumer, it becomes less interruptive. We're all fed up with seeing the same ad. So you watch an hour of TV of seeing the same ad in 3 consecutive breaks, particularly true of some of the streaming services. And I think what we're really committed to doing, we've put a lot of press out around this, is with our new One platform, is actually to deliver a much better advertising experience for everybody. One that blends linear and digital, because we think that is an increasingly and utterly artificial divide. The word digital hardly needs to be said anymore. We live in a digital world. But yet also one that helps marketeers do their jobs better. So I'm really excited about the future of advertising for the next few years.
Cool.
I'm also excited about cocktails.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, guys.
Which is, I think, our immediate future.
Nice job.
Thank you to our panelists. This concludes Digital Entertainment World 2020. Please enjoy our closing night reception in the Cinder Lounge in the lobby level. We hope to see you at our next event, LA Games Conference.
Some say love is a burning